Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started for the Raymore City Council work session for Monday, July the 17th. We have 3 items on our agenda tonight. The first item is the board and commission appointments. We have 2 that are up for renewal at, and they actually are both Arts Commission individuals, Sharon Paris and Pat Setzer. Pat's an at-large, Sharon's a Ward 1 council member, or Ward 1, excuse me, not a Ward 1 council member, commission member. They are both desire to be reappointed. They've both done, I've gotten the feedback, they're both doing great. There's no reason to upset that apple cart, so I intend to reappoint. And if there's no objections, that's the way we'll move forward next Monday. Okay, thank you. And the next item on the agenda is a process for excusing council members and mayor. I'll turn that over to Mr. Fearborn.
Thank you, sir. And I will ask Mr. Zur to introduce this item to the council for your consideration and discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Fearborn. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Real quickly, in going through the charter review with the Charter Review Commission, staff had the opportunity to identify an item that we were hopeful of being able to address with you all as well. Under the charter, currently section 3.7B5 indicates a failure to attend consecutive meetings, and this is going to be part of your charter review discussion as well, but that particular section ends with without being excused by the council. Identification of excused by the council, I know that in the past, generally the mayor has identified council members who weren't going to be present at an upcoming meeting or who missed a prior meeting, and the matter basically moves on from that point. In light of the specific reference in the terms of the charter, and so that you aren't just doing an acceptance by acquiescence or silence, we have decided it may be appropriate to put in place a procedure that would allow the council to acknowledge these are the individuals that are absent, and yes, we are in fact accepting them as excused absences moving forward. That being said, what you've been provided is a proposal which would be framed in very similar terms to what you would do for the acceptance of minutes for the prior council meetings. So it's not going to be by resolution that you would accept an excused absence. It would simply be an additional item. So on the consent agenda, where you would see acceptance of the minutes, acceptance of any resolutions that would be appropriate for the consent agenda, and then acceptance of excused absences as identified by the mayor during the roll call. What we're anticipating is during the roll call of each meeting, once the roll call is completed, if there are individual council members who are absent, the mayor, or if the mayor pro tem is serving on that particular occasion, would identify whether or not council members had been had contacted him or her with regard to absences. That you'd then be able to reference that further on down in the consent agenda. So we have put together this proposal. The idea would be that every council meeting you would see this proposed acceptance of excused absences as part of the consent agenda further on. I'm happy to answer any questions. Yes, Councilman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is this also going to outline the procedural aspect of this, or do we just simply need to email or call? Is it going to be outlined what the procedure for trying to be approved for?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, the procedures that are in place right now are appropriate. It's just for purposes of actually officializing the excuse at the meeting, because it does say the council shall offer that, then through the process of the consent agenda it would occur. Mr. Moorhead.
The Charter Commission did not address this specific question, but one of the questions I had on this was really what constitutes an excused versus unexcused absence, and you know, respectfully, you know, I find this a kind of a dangerous question, because the problem is I mean, in this instance, I'd rather see the brush sweep pretty broad, because, you know, candidly, somebody's gold is somebody else's trash. And the idea here is what may be a good excuse for you. How subjective is it for other people to kind of step in and view otherwise? For example, if somebody's out of town on a personal trip or vacation, no offense, I think all of us at work at our jobs, we get time off occasionally. And I've never cast a stone at a council member missing a meeting just because something in their personal life in and of itself gets in the way. I mean, one of the discussions that we will talk about later deals with how many meetings a councilman can miss. 25% of, over 50 meetings, that's one thing. I guess I just have to be, I want to express a little caution about what constitutes an unexcused absence. Now, I will think of one limited example, and it's a number of years ago. I don't want to mention anybody's name, but we did have a meeting where there was a council member who we had caught wind there was going to be some negative publicity from members of the public. And some bad weather was rolling in, and that council member called to attempt to get people to not show up to the meeting, to cancel the meeting. The weather never rolled in, so it was a clear sky. Technically, and I don't want to get into, because I don't know maybe the full story of that, something like that potentially could have been considered an act of bad faith. But I almost think like it needs to be an act of bad faith that doesn't allow you to be here. And so I'm hesitant to, and I just don't see that. I would not, I don't think any single member on this dais right now has ever missed a meeting in what even I would define as bad faith. So I'm not sure, I don't know how we dig into this. I know some other people have thoughts.
Well, from my perspective, and having been a police chief for 25 years, I kind of know what an excused and an unexcused absence are. And when people show up to work or don't show up to work and have not notified anybody, pretty much is an unexcused absence, and pay is docked. I don't think it's any dissimilar here. I mean, if we've got council members that are contacting me with legitimate reasons for not being present at the time, I think they should legitimately be excused. And if they exceed the numbers of absences, then that might be a matter for this board to take up. But I just don't see us not being able to recognize what's excusable and inexcusable, to be honest with you.
Well, and if I may, Mr. Mayor, I'm not challenging that people can or can't. And if the criteria is you don't let, mayor or staff know ahead of time, that's perfectly fine. Again, I'm not the one trying to pick the bar. I didn't know how deep into the excuse that would ever get evaluated.
Anyone else? Mr. Keller?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I couldn't agree with Mr. Moorhead any more than what I do. He pointed out very articulately, in my opinion, and for me to add anything more is kind of difficult. But what I will add is that when we get into a consensus or a vote of the council, we've got a matter of 8 people. And what is an excuse and unexcused? We all have very different standards. And quite frankly, some of my standards are higher than what ethics say, And I'm not ringing my own bell. I am not. Quite frankly, when I was in the hospital, I wanted to be here that night. And had I been able to been here, I would have been here. But this has been not a prerogative, but a responsibility of the mayor. That the mayor runs the meetings, sets the agenda, matter of fact, even sets the seating arrangement. Every aspect as far as the meeting goes, I feel belongs to the mayor. And for that to be taken away from the mayor is in conflict with what our current charter is. Now, I know that we're going through a charter review, but
well, hold on, let me stop you there, because could you please read the section about excuse?
Actually, the charter calls for the city. That's where we got into some conflict. A lot of people believe that by the mayor announcing it, the mayor is excusing them. The mayor does not have the prerogative to excuse them. That rests with the city council. That's where the problem is.
So we've been in conflict with the current charter.
I would not say conflict. I would say that your practices have been basically acceptance by silence and acquiescence once the mayor has provided his input as to why an individual council member was not going to be there. The goal of this proposal would simply be to have that followed up with a very basic acceptance in the consent agenda to acknowledge providing some degree of paperwork in the future that, yes, in fact, there was an excused absence for this individual.
Okay, and then I would have to retort that, and I don't know where this is written, but I know Mr. Moorhead will agree with me because we've had this discussion, that the council is self-policing and that we have that authority of policing ourselves, that if we think that if there is an egregious problem or just somebody, in the instance, somebody not showing up, time after time after time, we, as the council, have the responsibility and the ability to self-police and remedy that problem amongst ourselves. Am I correct?
Go ahead, Mr. Moore.
Well, I was only going to, I don't know if I can fully answer that question. I was going to kind of go off what Mr. Zur was saying. While we may not have expressly been following the charter language, or at least knowingly following it, kind of doing it, you know, applied admission by silence, I would just remark that I don't think we've made any foul here. I don't think we've ever breached this rule because, again, subjectively, what is an excused versus unexcused? And number two, we've always operated in relative good faith. Even the example I gave, I can't really say that was an act of bad faith. I was just trying to give an example of something that could have at least strayed toward that. And even then, it might not have been. This is a weird question that I'm not sure I have an answer on, but you're right. I think we've kind of relatively policed ourselves pretty well, and I'm not sure it's worthy of discussion. I'm at a loss of how to get to a good answer.
Mr. Zur.
From a procedural standpoint, you in fact are the judge of your qualifications. Section 3.8 of the charter is very clear on that. The notion would be this is going to be included, proposed to be included in the consent agenda. Anyone who had an issue, hey, we've got a council member who has asked for the last 25 meetings to be excused. I would hope that at some point or another in that 25 period meeting time frame that you would have requested to have the item removed from the consent agenda for further discussion. Just like any item that's on your consent agenda, if one council member requests that it be removed, it is removed for further discussion. My thought is that was where you would be able to raise it and to address it as far as a, hey, is this really abiding by our qualifications at this point?
Mr. Holman.
Thank you, sir. To me, it just adds another layer of bureaucracy onto this. To me, the general question is, if I can't make it, I've got half enough of brain to call Chris or Jim and say I won't be there because I'm going to be out of town with my work. Or if I just feel like I don't want to show up, you know, Chris, I don't feel very good tonight. I'm down, I'm ill, I can call. Whether I want to go golfing or not, it doesn't really matter. And the fact is that with this body, the people that are here wanted to be here. You all invested time and a lot of effort and a lot of money to be on this group. And so the issue to me becomes more of whether or not you were here as opposed to whether or not you were here for poor intent, because your ward is missing out on being represented in the time that you're not here. So again, I would be more inclined to take action against someone, and we find historically that most council members that get into this job and find that they have a direct conflict with their work, for example, and can't make a lot of the meetings, will not choose to run a second time. Again, people that are here want to be here. There may be value in this. From procedurally, there may be value in this. I'm just saying I think the bigger question becomes if someone is just unable because of other commitments to make it, they're not properly representing their ward, and they're not doing the city the service that they at least intended to do when they ran. Well,
at the risk of getting into item C, the The actual verbiage with regard to absence was addressed by the Charter Commission within the charter, and it is one of the ballot language issues that will be placed before the voters. And so I think this was staff's attempt at making sure that we were following what existing charter does exist, so that we do follow, that we do officially recognize that particular absence as an excused absence. Sir?
Again, I don't necessarily have a problem with it. I'm just saying that to me, when you look at this, I would think, okay, well, you know, gosh, Joe's been really busy. He had to go out and make a bunch of trips because of family issues, and now his job is requiring, I'm sorry, I'm using you because you're close by, but now his job is requiring him to miss every third Monday night. One would hope that Joe would go, I can no longer functionally do this job, and I need to either resign, or my term's about up and I just won't run again. But if that person were to decide, no, I want to hang on to this, that's when I think we have an issue, when they can't fulfill the commitment that they made to the voters. But as far as this, to me, it just adds a little bit more to it. So
Yeah.
I guess no real opinion.
Mr. Zerd, did you have something to add?
The only thing I would say is, from staff's standpoint, what we felt this was doing was formalizing the silence. There wouldn't be any, because this would be in consent, you would hear the mayor announce, let's say, I'm sorry, sir, Mr. Burke called me 5 minutes before the meeting. He will not be here tonight, just like he always does at roll call. And then at the consent point, when the motion was being made for consent, it would be to approve item A, July 17th minutes, item B, resolution 17XX, accepting a project, item C, acceptance of excused absence, boom, it's done. And that's the only procedural issue, is we thought the council may want to formalize that silence that Mr. Zerr was talking about, where it's acquiescence by not saying anything. We would not anticipate that those who are absent would be brought up for debate in any form whatsoever.
Mr. Zerr?
That also removes the notion of, and the standard and the tradition has been, the mayor has basically announced, hey, I received a telephone call from Councilmember Y prior to the meeting, and therefore, basically that passes as the acceptance of that excused absence. Because the charter is so clear that it's the council, not the mayor, doing that, we wanted to have at least some formalized process in there that shows council action saying, yes, acceptance of this is an excused absence, rather than the mayor's sole comments of, I got the telephone call.
Well, and a better example would be Ms. Badalgawad. She couldn't be here for the last work session. She can't be here for this session, or last council meeting, this work session, or the next council meeting. And so at the next formal council meeting, the excuse would be for the work session and this particular meeting, or any special meeting that might have occurred in between, because we do have a ribbon cutting ceremony or groundbreaking coming up next Monday, or tomorrow is when we're having it, actually. So, you know, those types of absences would then be as a cumulative between official meetings, whether or not they're excused or not. So there would be, I mean, and I think we would all agree that being out of country is an excused absence for family purposes. Mr. Kellogg.
You just threw me a real curveball right there. You just spoke of a groundbreaking tomorrow morning,
Tomorrow afternoon.
tomorrow afternoon.
Yeah.
At what time?
4:30.
4:30?
It was.
So now,
We got the email.
you know, and I'm gonna sound real facetious, and I'm not being, but now are we required to come to all groundbreakings that are outside of our working hours?
Well, I think it's also called a special meeting.
I don't think so, not when it's not called for that there's gonna be a quorum. I totally, and respectfully, completely disagree with that.
And I disagree with that.
A groundbreaking is not a meeting of this public body.
Actually, it is, sir.
It absolutely is.
By state statute, if 4 or more of you are together, you are meeting.
Then when
Or
was the
5 or
last
more.
time that it was noticed up on the front of city council is my question.
Every single time, sir.
I did not know that.
Yep.
The dinner we had at Centerview was noticed up for a casual dinner.
The groundbreaking has been noticed up for all boards, commissions, and the city council for, gosh, a couple weeks now.
Mr. Townsend, did you have something?
I did. Just a quick question. With this being added to the consent agenda and possibility of debate, pulling it and having a debate, if it got to the point someone reaching a certain number of absences, for the privacy of the council member, is it an opportunity with the provisions on our notices for executive session, with respect to that discussion, if the topic related
That's a great question,
needed to
Mr.
have some
Zurich. What do
executive
you think?
session privileges?
I would say generally what you're going to be doing, if you're going to pull something from a consent agenda, it goes on to the next item there during the course of the regular session. If the council was inclined to request that there be a work session on the issue or executive session more appropriately, then yes, an executive session could be identified.
So the terms that are on
Majority
are
vote.
typically posted here would suffice, or do we need to have additional?
I would see that if, I would anticipate if if a council member finally decided that they didn't, or decided that they did not want to do the because excusing it is the automatic. If they had an issue or they wanted to ask a question about it, et cetera, they could pull it from the consent agenda, ask that it not be put on, and ask for an executive session relative to consent agenda item C. And because the council can go into executive session at the end of the meeting for any item that is on the agenda, whether executive session is called for or not, that would be an appropriate action.
Because once this is, if this is on the charter, this is it for 10 years for review, or can it come up?
This
and
isn't
get
part of the
reviewed?
charter.
No, I mean, if it is approved in the language. can
It
be-
doesn't need to be approved by the, I'm sorry, Mayor.
Well, I think what Mr. Townsend's referring to, the part about absences with regard to what is being changed in the charter.
That and the ability, if the discussion for the member's absence is private and want to kind of maintain the integrity of the privacy, going into the session, executive session.
So the language of the charter currently says that the council would be the responsible party for excusing any absences. That's not going to change with any proposed charter amendment that we have at this particular time. The only thing that will change with regard, if the proposed charter amendments are approved, the only item that would change would be that it would add to it work sessions and not just the regular meetings.
Mr. Moorhead.
I kind of want to back up on what Councilmember Kellogg was talking about, the ribbon cutting tomorrow, or groundbreaking. I was planning on attending anyway, but I would ask, isn't this a park building and isn't it on park property? So are we actually doing the groundbreaking? I thought the park board was the one doing the groundbreaking and we were just invited to be bystanders. Are we putting on the helmets and turning the soil? Because I was under the different impression.
Both groups are invited, sir. But to the posting, if there is the potential for 5 council members to show up, we have to post that as a meeting.
Well, I'm not objecting to the posting of it, but I was under the impression this was really park board driven activity rather than council.
This one is a joint, and from here on out, they're all park board. But yeah, we anticipated the mayor and Chairman Manson being front and center, and then the council going one way and the park board going the other,
Fair enough.
with everybody there.
Mr. Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this is a good idea. I will certainly vote for it. I think it provides an official record, so that way if someone comes along later and wants to say that a member has missed too many meetings without getting approval, well, that member can't be called into question as foul without calling all of us as a body in question as foul for approving those. Each time that we approve it as a group, it puts us all together as we agree that that was excused. Thank you for letting us know. And then we're all part of that process, that review process. So if that person later someone wants to be angry and emotional and say, oh, you've missed a lot of meetings, well, unless there's a record of that person making the accusation and saying that particular vote that night that they missed, they agreed that they were indeed excused. The last point, this is maybe for a future work session idea. This could possibly need to review what we talked about a couple years ago with technology, and maybe perhaps members could be in attendance in technology and be able to discuss but not vote in the future as we move farther and farther in the 21st century. And I think a lot of people would love to be in attendance as much as they can, even if they are out of town. And maybe you don't get to vote when you're out of town, but you do get to provide discussion. Anyway, that's a future topic. Thank you.
Mr. Kellogg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm going to say that I completely still disagree with this. I think it's a horrible idea. Just to give my personal life from where I work, in the case of tomorrow night at the groundbreaking, if I was to have to work overtime and all the stars aligned and utopia was to happen and there was an online meeting, I couldn't attend it, even online, because of the security nature of where I work, okay? So there's an example right there. That might be hypothetical, but it's not impossible to think that it could happen, because it could. I'm still opposed to this because it goes back to what I've said already, that we are self-policing. And I police myself, and I believe all of my colleagues police themselves also. And pretty much everybody I've served with over the last 8.5 years has acted that way too. I have not seen a problem to where we need to react to ghost in the closets. This, I had a point that I was going to make, and I just lost it. So I guess it boils down to that I have faith in the council. I have faith in all my colleagues I've served with, and faith in the ones that I will serve with in the future to act appropriately. If they cannot serve or they cannot attend, you know, the last one that I remember resigning their position was Councilman Hughes, because his work schedule changed and he had to step down. That was the last one. That's how far back that goes. That was before I was on the council. You know, and I have not heard since then of another council member having that issue. So I don't see a need for it. I really don't.
Well, without any further ado, I guess we'll ignore this for the time being, or do we have, do we want to put this on a future agenda item for, I think what we were trying to do is get some kind of consensus to start a procedure to move forward with this so that it would be part of the consent agenda. Am I correct?
If we get the nods from the council tonight, depending on...
It'll just be on the...
We just have it on the consent agenda from here on out.
Yeah.
It'd be the last item on consent agenda.
Yeah. Mr. Moorhead?
Mr. Mayor, do not let my comments be confused. I'm not opposed to this. What my comments were is I'm just not sure that this is going to be a widely dangerous ordinance in place. I think it's going to be just kind of a nominal procedural step that we'll take.
Right. It's just a procedure.
My concern is since I'm really not seeing a lot of unexcused regularity here, I mean, we're just going to rapid fire through these things. I don't think a lot of people are ever going to violate it. So I value the concerns though that have been given both ways, but oh no, don't take, my comments are, yeah, go ahead and just throw it on and let us vote on it. Okay. So I'm the exact opposite. My comments were to the substance, not to the form.
I got you.
Sir?
Mr. Barber?
Sorry.
And I have no problems with it either. I kind of feel the same way Derek does. I do have a question though. You know, we get the agenda on Thursday. If somebody calls and you know it's excused before that, that would be on the agenda that we...
That's correct. It would be on a corrected agenda for that evening.
You don't get the call until there's an emergency or whatever, but you don't get the call to an hour before the council meeting. There's not any time to change it then. How does that work?
Again, sir, no names get listed here. All this is doing is formalizing what was the silence of the council. The mayor has always been very good about going, Councilmember Burke called me 5 minutes before the meeting. This would look exactly the same every single meeting. Okay. The only thing that would change is if nobody was announced absent at any point in time by the mayor, you could still approve it. because nobody was announced, and it says anybody who's announced. Or you could simply say, if Councilmember Moorhead were making the motion, because he normally does, he could make the motion, approval of items A and B, and because no one was announced absent, item C is removed from the consent. Second, move on. All it's doing is formalizing the silence.
Making it a council decision as opposed to just a reference from the mayor.
Yeah, and sir, staff absolutely interpreted your remarks as being, if there was ever a time when you were going to ask that this be removed from the consent item for discussion, I kind of interpreted your remarks of, we better be really careful about that discussion.
Tolman.
My position really hasn't changed on it. Like I said, I don't know that it's necessary, but it's okay. But I did want to address something that Councilmember Kellogg stated, and you stated in response when we talked about, for example, the ribbon cutting being a special meeting. It certainly becomes a meeting legally when there are four or five of us in attendance. I think the question that Kevin had some legitimate concern on, is that a required attendance meeting? And that's the problem. I think that's kind of where he was going with that, and that's what he was looking for, a little feedback there. I look at the meetings, I think, as most everybody does here, with great importance, certainly a regular meeting of the council or a special meeting called here in the dais for, say, we used to meet for our sidewalk meetings on Saturdays, or budget. We used to come in on Saturdays for budget. Those things certainly take great importance, followed then by a work session because we were formulating what we're probably going to be voting on. I, like Kevin and everybody else here, I try and make, the ribbon cuttings, but if I'm at work, I can't do it. And I typically don't call and say, hey, I can't be there, or I was planning to be there, but today I got jammed up, I won't be there till 6. What I wouldn't want to see, I don't think it would happen, but I could see his concern being that, gee, I missed a couple of the community conversations, I didn't go to a couple ribbon cuttings, I'm already at a 10% absentee rate here. So I think that's probably where he was headed with that. Yeah. Just kind of might clear that up a little bit.
Okay. Mr. Kellogg.
Yeah, you hit it right spot on the head, and I appreciate that. What I was going to say, and this goes right into it, is where I do my self-policing is when council conducts business, conducts discussion that is going to affect regular business, okay? It's always been, and currently right now, that work sessions are not counted towards absences because those are not considered. Historically, since I've been on the council, and even before me when I was watching the council meetings, the work sessions are not considered council business because we don't vote. That's the justification. We take consensus or a straw poll, even though I sometimes disagree with that. All it takes is one person to ask the mayor to put something on the agenda and it's done. So I really don't see a sense for or a need to even take a consensus. But where I self-police is when council business is taking place. And that has always been the regular meetings, the budget sessions, the special sessions that we call and say, okay, we're gonna meet the 5th Monday of the month. It's always there. And here for about the last 3 years, we've been using the vast majority of them. So that's my justification, and that's my reasoning for being so passionate about this, is that, again, when I signed up to be a council member and I asked the voters to elect me, that's what I took on. And I believe all of my colleagues sitting around this table and that I have served with over the last 8.5 years have had the same passion and commitment to the voters. That's all I got.
Where do you want to go next?
I think I've heard from 4.
Go ahead and move forward, and it'll be part of the consent agenda.
It'll be part of the consent agenda. If we could, because it has come up a couple of times, again, for purposes of posting, a groundbreaking is considered a meeting because we have to post it up because there could be 5 or more members there. It would be entirely up to the council whether or not you would want to consider that a required attendance meeting. It splits 2 different ways. So if the council, by consensus here, is saying those are not required attendance meetings unless you're sitting in here, then, again, it's a special meeting for purposes of we have to post it up.
Okay. Mr. Ullman?
We're going to probably hear about it here in C, but actually the voters are going to decide as to whether our obligation qualifies with work sessions as well, correct? So that may be extended by the voters in a formal fashion here and when this is on the ballot.
Okay, well, we'll move on and make this part of the procedure for the consent agenda. And next item is item C, the charter amendment discussion. And I'll turn it over to the charter chair, Mr. Moorhead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the council, we're passing around what is deemed the amended report. You'll see, though, it does not say amended, but it does list today's date to show that this is effective as of today. This is the final revised report recommendations to present to the voters. I would ask that you turn to page 20, where we see the recommended ballot language, and we can kind of quickly get through this. First and foremost, you'll notice questions 1, 2, and 3 are highlighted on page 20. Some of that is kind of a procedural change staff brought to us just for better clarification regarding language. But there are 3 highlighted sections, Mr. Fearborn.
The one we passed out tonight, sir, at your direction, is a completely clean one with the staff language, but there are no highlights on it. The highlight one is from, because you had directed that.
I'm pulling my work papers. I apologize. Probably safer that way too. Okay, so getting to page 20, though, getting to our proposed language, there was some adjustment there, basically question 2 and 3, where there was some confusion and some ambiguity of language regarding the municipal judge, that in the prosecutor section to mirror up with our earlier justification. So the justifications did not change. The language just better defined what our change was. In addition, there is a section under question 4B. The issue regarding compensation has changed. It is now limited only to a requirement of an annual discussion at a council work session. There is a change on question 4E. You will see at the second line, at the very end of the line, the word or was an and. It is now an or. And then the section regarding a potential removal or empowerment under recall was removed by its entirety. And that was actually 4 questions were presented to the charter. They discussed and made requisite changes as they felt. This is the completed document that the Charter Commission stands uniformly by and now presents to you.
For the record, I did attend that meeting, and precisely what Mr. Moorhead has said occurred there. And from my perspective, it does clean up a lot for purposes of some of the issues that were brought up at the first work session when it was presented, and we went through the items one by one that Mr. Zur so eloquently went through for us so that we could understand it a little bit better. And those things were presented to the charter, and they did a great job of discussing those and amending and listening to the council, and which I very much appreciate. And from my perspective, it's a decent document to present to the voters, and I'll open it up for discussion. Anyone else wish to say anything?
Quick clarification. For item 4B, it's now going to be placed on the council work session, or?
Compensation will
Yes.
be discussed at a work session annually.
The non-highlighted. I just want to make sure. This is the old one.
Yeah, that's the old one.
Yes.
I got kind of turned around here. Thank you.
Mr. Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Wanted to say I was unable to attend that meeting, but I watched it today, and I think the commission did a great job spending 2 hours going over the 4 points that we talked about in our last work session. And once again, they did a thorough job at going through and making sure that things were handled appropriately.
Thank you, sir. And
Mr. Mayor, if I could
Mr.
ask
Holman.
Mr. Fearmore, oh, sorry. No, no.
I was just going to say, dovetailing on Councilmember Townsend's point, there would be a requirement, basically almost administratively, of staff to put that agenda item on a work session once a year for us to discuss with the mayor's approval, of course. It would not preclude us from bringing it up additional times should we see fit. Am I
That's
correct
correct.
in that assessment?
that's correct.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Mayor, if I could ask, Mr. City Manager, could you please explain to us what the next procedural step is now that this has been submitted to the council and we're kind of at this point basically through questions of it? What is the next step to get this before the voters?
The reading of having this placed on the ballot will take place, the first reading will be the first meeting of August. The second reading will be the second meeting of August. It will then subsequently be filed with the county clerk by the end of August deadline to have it placed on the November ballot. I will check back, but with historically 10 years ago, I don't know if it was done, but at some point in that period, at one of those two meetings, it will be necessary for the mayor to dismiss the commission formally.
Okay. Mr. Holman?
A less formative portion of this, but I would like for this council to authorize a personally designed medallion for the members of the commission. I'd kind of like for them to be in that lighted box like we had from Chief Zimmerman's husband loaned to us. As Councilmember Townsend and Councilmember Berenson can attest, and the mayor from their time in the military, it's not the medal, it's the memory behind it. And those people dedicated a lot of their times, basically a year of their time, to make our city better, and I'd like for them to have a memento of what they did for the city. I don't think we've done it in the past, and when I say medallion, I'm talking bigger than the challenge coin. I'm talking about one about the size of a coaster, baseball. I'll offer to help design it. Mr. Icky and Melissa can probably do a better job, but I'd be glad to join in with that effort. But I would certainly like to do that, and then when you dismiss the commission, if it's available and ready at that time, we could present it to them as well.
Absolutely. Obviously with the new logo. I was kind of moving in that direction anyway. Mr. Berenson?
Thank you, Mr. Hallman. I wanted to mention that we should do something to thank them as well, too. So if not that, I think we should do something. I would agree with that. They spent a lot of time on that and
Agreed.
Did a job that I'm not sure I would be quite as willing to do. So good for them. And
Actually picked up a catalog the other day, if you want to go in my office and look at it with me. We can do it. Okay. Yes, Mr. Moorhead?
Well, I very rare, I guess this is one of the few times I'm uncomfortable speaking on behalf of the commission. I would respectfully decline only because I would, honest to God, say, working with everybody on this commission, how we really felt a sense of value of what we were doing. And this report itself, on page 2 with our names on it, we have a pretty significant legacy here that I'm quite proud of. I mean, this is something that we feel very good about, and the compliment's already there, respectfully. I appreciate the gesture, absolutely, and it is heartfelt, but like I said, this was an achievement that you kind of feel internally, and we all feel very good about it, and I was very proud to work with each of the members on it. It was a very unique experience, and it has its own value just going through it, so I'm not sure, I guess I would never be disrespectful and reject you handing me something, we already kind of got our pat on the back, and we're appreciative of it. So thank you very much. That's not necessary.
Mr. Holman?
While I appreciate the chair's humility, I would respectfully request that he and Mr. Burke recuse themselves from this question, as they cannot, they shouldn't be part of this discussion. It should just be the rest of us, because we didn't sit in on that commission, they did.
Understandable. Mr. Burke?
Thank you. I wouldn't, if I could just borrow a laminator and laminate this page with our signatures, I could put that on my bulletin board in my classroom, and I'd be happy with that. If we have a laminator in the building, I can use one at school if not.
And the effort it took to get Mrs. Hubach's signature on that, by the way, if you watched that video, was a true act of bravery. Not that she didn't want to sign it, but she was fighting the whole way. She didn't want the committee to stop, so.
Mr. Barber?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think Councilman Holman's got a great idea. I would ask the council not to listen to these two, though I really do appreciate the hard work that you put in as a chair, as a councilman, as citizen volunteers. We got one here in the audience tonight. I know it was a lot of hard work. I did attend one meeting. They made me speak, so I didn't attend any others. I just watched online. But I do know that it was a lot of hard work. There's a lot of discussion from the first report, second report, this final report. I really do appreciate the hard work that was put in. It was a well-done piece of work, and the time spent. The city's going to be better for you guys, so thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else?
I would also concur, some sort of memento, something to recognize the moment. I was the one, I think probably one, at the time I was a citizen that sat in on an actual session, so that was pretty interesting to see the process and the detail that went into those topics on that evening, but definitely something to commemorate the time and effort that went into this and dedication, so I would wholeheartedly concur.
Mr. Kellogg?
I really don't want to comment on this, but I'm going to. Guys, I may seem a little angry tonight. I'm passionate because we've got so many volunteers in this city, and one of them sitting here tonight, and I appreciate everything you've done on this commission. I know you know that from the bottom of my heart. Thank you, Mr. Stidham, for everything you've done, not only in this commission, but your work on the Parks Board. Everything you've done in this city. I know you've worked for other entities also, and it's not gone unappreciated. It's not gone unnoticed. Same thing with many other citizens that have worked on many different commissions. One in particular, and I'll sound real selfish and self-centered on this one here, was planning and zoning about 9-10 years ago. Mr. Holman sat on that one when we went through the UDC the very first time. That was an undertaking that was on the level of the Charter Commission, not to be overshined or undershined by it, but for the council to acknowledge only one group of citizens for their involvement, their dedication, their sacrifice, and not acknowledge the others is a disservice to the others, I believe. Again, I mean, no disrespect, no any bad verbiage to those folks. And I appreciate everything they've done. It's just that, like Mr. Moorhead said, you know, just this report is going into the records. This report is not going anywhere. Whenever somebody asks for this, that's who it's going to be right there, all enshrined, the very first page after the cover. And I mean that, enshrined. So that's what I got to say. Thank you.
I'm not recognizing you. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Moorhead.
Well, since Councilmember Kellogg opened the door, I get to walk through this, because I appreciate saying that. And that's a little of it too, because I've served as a volunteer as well, and especially on the growth management plan. And, you know, I tell you what, you know, when you think of, there is no priority when it comes to these boards and commissions. Some meet more often than others, and so, but that doesn't belittle or change the merit of what gets discussed. And again, I think it's a wonderful gesture and appreciated that everybody's saying, but I would have to agree and say, okay, if we're going to do this, fine, do it, but then we do it for everybody, and all boards and commission members should get some recognition, and I would actually support that. But again, and we're spending way too much time talking about this, and I'm not trying to stop discussion, but I would have to say kind of an all or nothing I would agree with as well.
Mr. Holman?
The reason that I would propose this, and that I did propose this for the Charter Commission, is that this is a once-in-a-decade group that is brought together of citizens, volunteer, who are not on a permanently standing committee or board, such as Planning and Zoning. And Kevin's correct. We did do a great deal of work in the UDC, and the Planning and Zoning Commission does that. But that's part of their job description as being on that board. It comes around every so often and has to be reviewed. This is a specialty board made up of people who may only touch government once every 10 years or one time in their life. That's why I think that this is a special occasion. It touches basically our version of a constitution, and that's why I think it's important enough to be recognized with some hardware, if you will.
Mr. Barber?
I just wanted to add, I forgot to thank staff as well, because I know there was a bunch of staff time involved in this as well, so thanks.
That's what I was going to say. We were going to recognize anybody beat Jeannie and all the crap she had to put up with you guys. Oh my gosh, yeah, there was a lot of work done. A lot of work done by everybody that worked on that, to be honest with you. Okay, well, thank you. We'll move forward from that and in an appropriate fashion, one way or another. Something to think about over the next couple of weeks. And with that, is there any other items to come before the work session tonight? Anybody want to bring anything up? Mr. Burke?
Real quick, if we have not, I'm proposing if we have not already given each member of every board and every commission that we have at least one of the city coins, we need to do so. Every arts commission, every P&Z, every tree board, every board of adjustment. I don't know if that's okay, but I think
Go ahead, Mr.
especially since we're going to have a new
The city
soon.
council will, thank you, sir.
Yeah.
The city council will remember that a long time ago, a very long time ago, the city manager received direction from you all, unanimous, regarding a medal and/or medals of the city. And the council discussion, which was wide-ranging, relative to individual acts of heroism and grinded out work being done by our boards and commissions. And so what staff took away from that was actually 3 medals of the city, 3 layers. The delay has not necessarily been so much in design and presentation. For lack of a better term, that's easy, but a little bit of substance relative to how you get to make those awards. There's been a lot of debate back and forth. Chief Zimmerman, who I actually assigned this task, has had to kind of beat her head against my door because of some actions relative to subcommittees of the council, whole committees of the council, closed session, open session when you're making these decisions, but we're almost there as far as getting to a point. We've had a long discussion about ad hoc committees appointed by the mayor versus a permanent committee, which is not allowed by the council. Perhaps some of these, not perhaps, I would foresee the 3rd level of that medal being exactly what the council is talking about tonight.
Very good. Okay. Thank you. Anybody have anything else to bring forward. Mr. Holman.
I just got a compliment this afternoon. Somebody was talking to me, and they knew that I'm from Raymore, and I'm on the council, and they said, saw your chief on TV the other night. I said, well, she's not my chief, she's our chief. But he said, she really did a good job. She handled herself really well. She's very smart and articulate. I said, yes, she is, and we're lucky to have her. So just wanted to pass that on.
If there's nothing else, we stand adjourned.